The notification pinged at 2:47 a.m., jolting me from my third cup of coffee and the security audit I'd been grinding through since dinner. My name's Caleb Monroe, and I make my living finding holes in other people's digital fortresses. Turns out, the biggest vulnerability was sitting right in my own house. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Another late night, honey? Elena's voice drifted from the hallway, dripping with that particular brand of condescension she'd perfected over our 15-year marriage. She stood there in her silk robe, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine shoot even at this ungodly hour. "Someone's got to pay for your Pilates classes," I muttered, not looking up from my screens. She laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "At least I'm doing something productive with my time instead of playing with computers like a teenager." That stung, mainly because she knew it would. Elena had this gift for finding exactly the right words to make you feel small. It's probably what made her so successful running her PR firm. She could cut people down to size with surgical precision. "These computers pay for the house you love so much," I said, finally turning to face her. "And the car, and the designer handbags, and whatever, Caleb. Some of us have real jobs tomorrow." She disappeared back down the hall, leaving me alone with the blue glow of my monitors and the familiar taste of resentment. That's when I noticed her phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. Elena never forgot her phone. The woman slept with it under her pillow like some kind of digital security blanket. Seeing it abandoned felt wrong, like finding a shark on dry land. I shouldn't have looked. I know that now. But 15 years of marriage had taught me to recognize the signs, the late meetings, the new perfume, the way she'd started looking through me instead of at me. My fingers moved across the screen before my conscience could stop them. The messages were all there, a digital trail of betrayal spanning 3 months. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Caleb's working late again." What a surprise. "Richard, you make me feel alive again. He wouldn't understand what we have." The hotel room was perfect. Same time Thursday? Richard Vale. I knew that name. Elena had mentioned him at dinner parties, some hotshot real estate investor with more money than sense, and a smile that belonged in a toothpaste commercial. The kind of guy who wore $1,000 suits and called everyone buddy, while looking for ways to screw them over. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through months of their digital foreplay. They weren't even trying to be subtle. Photos of expensive dinners, hotel room keys, intimate details that made my stomach turn. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was how happy she sounded. When was the last time Elena had texted me with that kind of enthusiasm? When was the last time she'd texted me at all? I heard the shower start upstairs. Elena always showered before bed now, another new habit that suddenly made perfect sense, washing off the evidence of her afternoon adventures before climbing into bed next to her clueless husband. The cybersecurity consultant in me couldn't help but admire the operational security failures. Leaving her phone unlocked, using the same hotel repeatedly, even saving Richard's contact under his real name instead of some code. If this were a corporate espionage case, I'd be writing a scathing report about basic security protocols. But this wasn't a case. This was my life falling apart in real time, one text message at a time. I took screenshots of everything, my training kicking in even as my world collapsed. Evidence first, emotions later. The photos, the messages, the hotel receipts she'd stupidly synced to her cloud storage. All of it went into an encrypted folder that would make the NSA proud. Then I did what I do best. I started digging deeper. Richard Vale wasn't hard to research. The man had an ego the size of Texas and a digital footprint to match. Social media profiles, business partnerships, even a few photos of him at charity galas looking like he owned the world. He was everything I wasn't. Tall, conventionally handsome, the kind of guy who probably played golf and drove a BMW. But everyone has vulnerabilities. and Richard's were written all over his online presence. The real estate deals that skirted ethical boundaries, the business partners who'd gotten screwed over, the ex-wife who'd taken half his assets in a messy divorce. This wasn't just some random affair. Elena had upgraded to a man with serious baggage. The shower stopped upstairs. I quickly closed the browser windows and deleted my search history, muscle memory from years of covering my digital tracks. Elena's footsteps creaked across the bedroom floor, and I heard the distinctive sound of her plugging her phone into the charger. She'd be looking for it soon. I slipped the phone back onto the kitchen counter exactly where I'd found it, then returned to my desk like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The security audit on my screen looked different now, the code meaningless compared to the real-world hack I'd just uncovered. "Caleb?" Elena called from upstairs. "Have you seen my phone?" "Kitchen counter," I called back, proud of how normal my voice sounded. "Thanks, honey." Honey. The endearment felt like a slap across the face. How long had she been calling me that while texting another man? How many times had she kissed me goodbye before running off to meet Richard at some overpriced hotel? I stared at my reflection in the black monitor screen, pale, tired, wearing the same ratty t-shirt I'd had on for 2 days. No wonder she'd found someone else. The question wasn't why Elena was cheating. It was why she'd stayed married to me this long. But that was the old Caleb thinking, the one who'd spent 15 years making himself smaller so Elena could shine brighter, the one who'd apologized for working late while she was out screwing her way through the city's real estate elite. I cracked my knuckles and pulled up a fresh terminal window. Time to see what other secrets the happy couple had been hiding. The next morning arrived with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Elena bounced into the kitchen like she'd won the lottery, humming some pop song while she made her protein smoothie. She was practically glowing, and I knew exactly why. "You're up early," I said, nursing my coffee and watching her performance. "Big day ahead. That new client I mentioned wants to meet for lunch." She didn't even have the decency to look guilty while lying to my face. I'd already checked Richard's calendar through his poorly secured business website. Lunch reservation at Chez Laurent, the kind of place where they charge $50 for a salad and act like they're doing you a favor. The same restaurant where they'd been meeting every Tuesday for the past month. "Anyone I know?" I asked, curious to see how deep the deception went. Elena's smile faltered for just a second. "I don't think so. Real estate investor, very private, boring stuff." "Sounds fascinating," I said calmly. "Don't do anything I wouldn't do." She laughed, and this time it sounded genuine. "That leaves me with quite a bit of flexibility." After she left, I sat in the silence of our kitchen and tried to figure out what hurt more, the betrayal or the casual cruelty. Elena had always been sharp-tongued, but there used to be affection underneath the barbs. Now there was just contempt, like I was some annoying roommate she couldn't wait to evict. My phone buzzed with a text from my old friend Mike. "Beer tonight? Sarah's got book club, and I need to complain about my job to someone who pretends to care." Mike Peterson. We'd been friends since college, back when we both thought we'd change the world with our computer science degrees. He'd ended up in corporate IT, I'd gone the consultant route, but we'd stayed close. His wife Sarah had become friends with Elena, creating one of those couple friendships that seemed so stable from the outside. "Rain check," I texted back. "Working on something big." That wasn't entirely a lie. I was working on something big, I just wasn't sure what yet. I spent the day doing what I do best, gathering intelligence. Richard Vale's digital life was an open book once you knew where to look. The man used the same password for everything, his dog's name plus his birth year, his email, his social media, even his online banking. Amateur hour. But it wasn't just financial records I was after. I wanted to understand the man who'd stolen my wife. What did he have that I didn't, besides money and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no? The answer was depressing in its simplicity. Richard Vale was everything Elena thought she deserved. He drove a Tesla, lived in a penthouse downtown, and treated money like confetti. His Instagram was a highlight reel of expensive restaurants, exotic vacations, and carefully staged photos designed to make people jealous. More importantly, he was married. Veronica Vale appeared in exactly 3 photos on Richard's social media, always at formal events where a wife was required as an accessory. She looked miserable in every shot, standing just far enough away to suggest marital discord. A quick search revealed she was some kind of art dealer, successful in her own right, which made Richard's cheating even more pathetic. So we were both being betrayed. The question was whether Veronica knew about Elena, or if she was as clueless as I'd been 24 hours ago. I was still pondering this when Elena came home at 7 p.m., 3 hours later than any business lunch should last. She looked disheveled in a way that made my stomach turn, her lipstick gone and her hair slightly mussed, despite obvious attempts to fix it. "How was your meeting?" I asked from the couch, not bothering to look up from my laptop. "Productive?" she said, heading straight for the stairs. "I need to shower before dinner." Of course she did. Can't have the husband smelling another man on his wife. That would be awkward. While the water ran upstairs, I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled up Elena's contact list and found Sarah Peterson's number. "Hey Sarah, it's Caleb. Quick question. Do you know if Elena mentioned anything about working late this week? She's been coming home exhausted, and I'm worried she's taking on too much." The response came back within minutes. "Working late? She was at lunch with Mike and me today, complaining about how you never pay attention to her anymore. Said she was thinking of taking a vacation by herself to find some excitement. Maybe you two should talk?" There it was. Confirmation that Elena wasn't just cheating. She was actively poisoning our mutual friendships against me, playing the neglected wife while screwing around behind my back, making me the villain in our story. The shower stopped, and I heard Elena moving around upstairs. Time to see how committed she was to this performance. "Honey?" I called up. Sarah texted. "She said you had lunch with her and Mike today?" Silence. Then footsteps, faster now, and Elena appeared at the top of the stairs in her bathrobe, phone already in her hand. "She must have gotten confused," Elena said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I mentioned I might call her later." "Huh. Weird. She seemed pretty specific about you complaining about me over appetizers." Elena's face went through several expressions before settling on annoyed defiance. "Fine, yes, I had lunch with Sarah. I needed someone to talk to about us, about how distant you've become. Is that a crime?" "Not at all," I said, keeping my voice level. "I just wonder what your real estate client would think about you ditching him for margaritas and gossip." "There was no client, Caleb. I lied because I knew you'd make a big deal about me having lunch with friends instead of working. You're so obsessed with money and productivity that I can't even take a break without feeling guilty." It was a masterful performance, turning her deception into my fault with the kind of emotional jujitsu Elena had perfected over the years. The old me would have apologized, maybe even offered to take her out to dinner to make up for being such an unsupportive husband. But I'd seen the hotel receipts. I'd read the texts. I knew exactly where she'd spent her afternoon, and it wasn't complaining about me to Sarah Peterson. "You're right," I said, closing my laptop. "I have been distant lately. Maybe we should do something together this weekend. Reconnect." Elena looked genuinely surprised. "Really? Really? In fact, why don't you invite some friends? Make it a group thing. Sarah and Mike, maybe some people from your work. We could go to that new place downtown, the one with the rooftop bar." "That sounds—" Elena paused, probably calculating whether Richard would be available. "That sounds nice. I'll make some calls." She disappeared back upstairs, and I heard her phone ring almost immediately. I didn't need to guess who she was calling. While Elena coordinated her social calendar, I opened my laptop and started planning something else entirely. If she wanted to play games, I'd show her what a real player looked like. The first step was reconnaissance. I needed to understand the full scope of Elena's betrayal, map out all the players, and identify the pressure points that would give me maximum leverage. This wasn't just about catching a cheating wife anymore. This was about dismantling the entire network of lies and manipulation she'd built around our marriage. I started with the obvious targets: Richard, Elena, and whoever else was enabling this charade. But as I dug deeper, I found something I wasn't expecting. Elena's best friend, Sienna Walsh, wasn't just aware of the affair, she was actively helping coordinate it. Sienna Walsh had always rubbed me the wrong way, but I'd chalked it up to personality differences. She was Elena's college roommate turned business partner, the kind of woman who wore power suits like armor and treated every conversation like a negotiation. Where Elena was all surface charm, Sienna was pure calculation, the brains behind their PR firm's success. But now, scrolling through intercepted messages between Elena and Sienna, I realized I'd completely underestimated how much she hated me. Caleb's getting suspicious. He asked about lunch today. Just stick to the story. Men like him are too insecure to dig deeper. He'll convince himself you're telling the truth because the alternative is too threatening to his ego. What if he finds out about Richard? Then we accelerate the timeline. The divorce papers are already drafted. With his income and your business connections, you'll come out ahead. Plus, Richard's already talking about leaving Veronica. I can't believe it's finally happening. 5 years of planning. 5 years. This wasn't some spontaneous affair. It was a long-term operation designed to extract me from Elena's life with maximum financial and social benefit to her. Sienna had been the architect, Elena the willing participant, and I'd been the mark from day one. I leaned back in my chair, genuinely impressed despite the betrayal. It was elegant in its simplicity. Keep the husband working and earning while building an exit strategy that left him with nothing but child support payments and a reputation as the boring tech guy who couldn't satisfy his wife. The only problem with their plan was that they'd underestimated their mark. I spent the next 3 days building a complete intelligence picture. Richard's business dealings, Sienna's client list, Elena's financial records, everything went into my digital dossier. The deeper I dug, the more vulnerabilities I found. Richard's real estate empire was built on leveraged debt and shady partnerships. One bad quarter would bring the whole thing crashing down, and he had several deals teetering on the edge of disaster. His marriage to Veronica was already hanging by a thread. She'd been photographed having dinner with a divorce attorney just last week. Sienna was even more exposed. Her PR firm represented several high-profile clients who valued discretion above everything else. A tech CEO hiding a gambling addiction, a senator's wife covering up her son's drug arrests, a pharmaceutical executive whose company was facing FDA sanctions. All of it documented in Sienna's encrypted files, which weren't nearly as secure as she thought. But Elena was the most vulnerable of all, and she didn't even know it. Her affair with Richard wasn't her first. I found evidence of at least 2 other relationships over the past 3 years, both with clients of her PR firm. She'd been systematically using her business connections to fuel her personal life, mixing professional relationships with sexual ones in ways that would destroy her reputation if they became public. More damaging was the financial impropriety I uncovered. Elena had been using company funds to pay for her hotel rooms, expensive dinners, and weekend getaways. Nothing technically illegal, but enough to raise serious questions about her business ethics and potentially expose the firm to lawsuits from clients who'd been overcharged to subsidize her affairs. By Thursday evening, I had enough ammunition to destroy all 3 of them. The question was how to deploy it for maximum impact. That's when Elena handed me the perfect opportunity. "I talked to everyone about this weekend," she said over dinner, picking at her salad while I pretended to read emails on my phone. "Sarah and Mike can't make it, some family thing. But Sienna's excited to meet some of my other friends." "Other friends?" "You know, people from work. Richard Vale, that real estate investor I mentioned. A few others. Elena's voice was carefully casual, but I could see the excitement in her eyes. She was going to parade her lover in front of me, probably get some sick thrill from watching us interact while I remained oblivious to their relationship. Sounds great, I said. I'm looking forward to meeting this Richard guy. You've mentioned him a lot lately. Elena's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Have I? Oh yeah, Richard this, Richard that. He must be quite the client to make such an impression. He's just very passionate about his projects. It's refreshing to work with someone who cares so much about success. I nodded like this made perfect sense, while mentally cataloging every micro-expression on her face. Elena thought she was playing chess, but she was actually playing tic-tac-toe against a grandmaster. Well, I can't wait to hear all about his passion, I said. Friday morning brought a text from Mike Peterson. Change of plans for tomorrow. Sarah's family thing got moved, so we can make it after all. Should be fun to meet Elena's fancy new friends. Perfect. I texted back, great. Fair warning, though. I think Elena might be going through some kind of midlife crisis. She's been acting strange lately, talking about needing more excitement in her life. Just keep an eye on things, okay? Everything all right between you two? Honestly, I'm not sure anymore. But let's not make it weird tomorrow night. Maybe having friends around will help. It was a masterful piece of social engineering. Mike would spend the entire evening watching Elena for signs of trouble, which meant he'd notice things he would normally overlook. And when Elena inevitably slipped up, touching Richard too familiarly, sharing inside jokes, displaying the kind of intimate knowledge that comes from sleeping together, Mike would see it all through the lens of a friend trying to protect his buddy's marriage. Saturday evening arrived with all the anticipation of a public execution. I dressed carefully, not too formal, not too casual, just the right amount of effort to suggest I was taking this seriously without trying too hard. Elena, meanwhile, looked like she was preparing for a magazine shoot. The red dress that hugged her curves, the jewelry I'd bought her for our anniversary, the perfume that used to drive me crazy with desire. Now, it just made me sad. We arrived at the rooftop bar fashionably late, and I immediately spotted our party. Sienna held court at a corner table, her silver hair perfectly styled and her expression sharp as a blade. Next to her sat a man who could only be Richard Vale, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car. Mike and Sarah were already there, looking slightly out of place among the designer clothes and expensive watches. Mike caught my eye and raised his beer in greeting, his expression already concerned. Good. The seeds I'd planted were taking root. Caleb? Sienna stood to greet us, her smile bright and completely fake. So wonderful to see you. It's been too long. Has it? I said, accepting her air kiss while calculating how much she knew about Elena's afternoon activities. Time flies when you're having fun. Richard rose from his chair with the kind of confident smile that belonged on a campaign poster. You must be Elena's husband, Richard Vale. His handshake was firm, probably practiced in front of a mirror. Caleb Monroe, Elena's told me so much about you. All good, I hope? Richard's laugh was just a little too loud, a little too confident. The laugh of a man who thought he was getting away with something. Oh, absolutely. She says you're very hands-on with your projects. Elena shot me a sharp look, but Richard just grinned wider. Guilty as charged. I believe in personal involvement, really getting to know the people I work with, understanding what makes them tick. I bet you do, I said, settling into my chair and signaling the waiter. Elena's the same way, very dedicated to client satisfaction. The double entendres flew over Richard's head, but I saw Sienna's eyes narrow slightly. She was smarter than her co-conspirator, more attuned to the subtle dynamics at play. But even she couldn't have guessed that I knew everything. The evening proceeded exactly as I'd expected. Richard dominated the conversation with stories about his business successes, name-dropping celebrities and politicians like they were personal friends. Elena hung on his every word, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny and finding excuses to touch his arm. Mike noticed. I could see it in the way his expression shifted from confusion to concern to barely concealed anger. Sarah was more subtle, but her social antennae were just as finely tuned. She kept glancing between Elena and Richard, then looking at me with something that might have been pity. "So Caleb," Sienna said during a lull in Richard's monologue, "Elena tells me you're working on some big cybersecurity project. Sounds fascinating." "It is, actually. I'm investigating a case of corporate espionage. Someone's been using inside information to manipulate business relationships for personal gain. The digital forensics are particularly interesting." Elena's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Richard, oblivious as always, leaned forward with interest. "Corporate espionage? Like actual spying?" "Oh yes, email interception, financial records analysis, social media surveillance. You'd be amazed how much people reveal about themselves online. Most folks have no idea how exposed they really are." "That's terrifying," Sarah said. "I mean, the idea that someone could just hack into your private life like that." "The scary part isn't the hacking," I said, meeting Elena's eyes across the table. "It's how people create their own vulnerabilities, using weak passwords, leaving digital trails, trusting the wrong people with sensitive information. The technology is just a tool. Human behavior is what makes the real damage possible." Sienna's smile had turned glacial. "Well, that's certainly something to think about." "Oh, I think about it all the time," I said. "In fact, I've been thinking about it a lot lately. Amazing what you can learn when you really start paying attention." The conversation moved on, but the damage was done. Elena spent the rest of the evening looking like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop, while Sienna kept shooting me calculating glances. Richard remained blissfully unaware, but then again, he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. As the evening wound down, Richard made his move. "Elena, didn't you mention wanting to see my new penthouse? The view from the 42nd floor is incredible." "Oh, that sounds amazing," Elena said a little too quickly. "Caleb, you don't mind if I take a quick look, do you? Richard's been describing the architecture all night." Every eye at the table turned to me. Mike looked like he wanted to punch something. Sarah's mouth had fallen open. Even Sienna seemed surprised by the brazenness of it. I smiled and raised my glass in a toast. "By all means," I said. "Enjoy the view." The silence that followed my toast was deafening. Mike's beer bottle hit the table with more force than necessary, while Sarah stared at Elena like she'd never seen her before. Even Richard seemed to sense that something had shifted, his confident smile faltering slightly. "Actually," Elena said, her voice tight, "maybe another time. It's getting late." "Nonsense," I said, still smiling. "You've been talking about Richard's penthouse for weeks. This is the perfect opportunity." "Have I?" Elena's laugh sounded forced. "I don't remember." "Oh, you definitely have. Just the other day you mentioned how impressive his architecture is. Very hands-on design. Wasn't that how you put it?" Richard's chest puffed out with pride, completely missing the undercurrent of tension. "I did work closely with the architects, spared no expense on the finishes." "I'm sure Elena would love to see your finishes," I said. "She has such an eye for quality craftsmanship." Mike had heard enough. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Sarah, we should go. Early morning tomorrow." "Right," Sarah said, gathering her purse with jerky movements. "Elena, we should catch up soon. Just the two of us." The ice in her voice could have frozen the rooftop bar's entire cocktail menu. Sarah Peterson was many things, but she wasn't stupid. She'd just watched her friend proposition another man in front of her husband, and her Midwestern sensibilities were having none of it. As Mike and Sarah made their awkward exit, I caught Mike's arm. "Thanks for coming tonight. I said quietly. Really opened my eyes to a few things. Mike's jaw was tight with anger. Caleb, if you need to talk, I'm fine, I said. Better than fine, actually. Sometimes you need to see things clearly before you can fix them. After they left, our cozy group felt considerably less cozy. Sienna was typing furiously on her phone, probably trying to manage the social fallout that was already spreading through our friend group. Richard looked confused but still hopeful about his penthouse tour, and Elena sat frozen in her chair, finally beginning to understand that the evening hadn't gone according to plan. Well, Richard said, standing and adjusting his expensive suit jacket. The night's still young. Elena, that offer stands if you're interested. I waited to see what Elena would do, genuinely curious about how far she was willing to push this charade. Would she actually leave with Richard in front of me, or had the evening's revelations finally penetrated her bubble of self-absorption? I think I should go home with my husband, Elena said finally, the words coming out like she was chewing glass. Richard's face fell, but he recovered quickly. Of course. Family first, right? Rain check then. Absolutely, Elena said, not meeting anyone's eyes. As we gathered our things, Sienna pulled me aside with the pretense of saying goodbye. Caleb, she said, her voice low and dangerous, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but Elena is my business partner and my oldest friend. If you're planning to make trouble... Trouble? I interrupted, genuinely surprised. Sienna, I'm just a boring tech guy who loves his wife. What kind of trouble could I possibly make? Her eyes narrowed. The kind that ruins people's lives. Funny, I said. I was just thinking the same thing. The ride home was a masterclass in passive-aggressive silence. Elena stared out the passenger window while I hummed along to the radio, occasionally commenting on the beautiful night or the light traffic. Every attempt at normal conversation felt like a small act of rebellion against the toxic atmosphere in the car. That was fun, I said as we pulled into our driveway. I really liked your friends. They're not my friends, Elena snapped. Richard is a client, and you know it. Right, a client who invites you to see his penthouse at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night. Very professional. Elena slammed the car door hard enough to rattle the windows. Don't what? Don't pretend you don't know what you're doing. Those little comments all night, the way you were watching everyone. You're trying to make me look bad. I followed her into the house, genuinely fascinated by her ability to twist reality. Elena, you spent the entire evening flirting with another man in front of our friends. I didn't make you do that. I was being polite to a client. By touching his arm every 30 seconds, by laughing at jokes that weren't funny, by accepting an invitation to his private residence. Elena whirled around in our foyer, her face flushed with anger and something that might have been panic. You're being paranoid. This is exactly why I can't talk to you anymore. You turn everything into some kind of conspiracy. Conspiracy, I repeated slowly. That's an interesting word choice. It's the right word choice. You're creating drama where none exists because you can't handle the fact that I have a life outside of this house. A life, I said. Is that what we're calling it? For a moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. Elena's face went through a series of expressions: anger, fear, defiance, and something that looked almost like relief. But then her walls went back up, and she retreated into the familiar territory of making me the villain. I'm not doing this, she said, heading for the stairs. I'm not going to stand here and defend myself against whatever paranoid fantasy you've cooked up. Elena, I called after her, my voice soft enough to stop her on the first step. I know. She turned slowly, and for the first time in months, I saw the real Elena. Not the polished PR executive or the bored housewife, but the woman I'd married 15 years ago, scared, guilty, and finally caught. Know what? She whispered. Everything. The word hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. Elena's face went pale, then flushed, then pale again. She gripped the banister like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I don't know what you think you know. I know about the hotel rooms, I said quietly. The ones you've been charging to the company credit card. I know about the text messages, the photos, the 3-month timeline. I know about Sienna's involvement and the divorce papers she's already drafted. Elena sank down onto the stairs, her designer dress pooling around her like spilled wine. How long? She asked. Since Tuesday night, when you left your phone on the kitchen counter. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's it? 4 days? 4 days to unravel 3 years of lies. You weren't as careful as you thought. What do you want? The question came out flat, defeated. Money? The house? Some kind of revenge? I sat down on the bottom step, close enough to touch her, but careful to maintain distance. I want to understand why. Why? Elena looked at me like I'd asked her to explain quantum physics. Caleb, when was the last time you looked at me? Really looked at me? Not just glanced up from your computer long enough to grunt hello? I look at you every day. No, you look through me, like I'm furniture or wallpaper or some kind of household appliance that keeps the domestic machinery running smoothly. The accusation hit harder than I expected because there was truth in it. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped seeing Elena as a person and started seeing her as a role, the wife, the social coordinator, the woman who handled the parts of life I didn't want to deal with. That doesn't justify what? Wanting to feel alive again? Wanting someone to see me as more than a convenience? It justifies having a conversation with your husband, not screwing around behind his back for 3 years. Elena flinched at the crude language, but she didn't deny it. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, she said quietly, since you forgot our anniversary and didn't even apologize when I reminded you 2 weeks later. I remembered that anniversary. I'd been deep in a major security audit, working 18-hour days to meet a timeline. Elena had mentioned dinner plans, but I'd been too exhausted and stressed to process the significance of the date. By the time I realized my mistake, she'd already canceled the reservation and stopped trying to get my attention. So you decided to find someone who wouldn't forget? I decided to find someone who would remember I exist. The honesty in her voice was devastating because it revealed how completely I'd failed as a husband, not just in the grand gestures, but in the small daily acknowledgments that make a person feel valued and seen. Richard remembers you exist, I said. Richard makes me feel beautiful. When I walk into a room, his whole face lights up like I'm the most amazing thing he's ever seen. When was the last time you looked at me like that? I tried to remember and came up empty. Somewhere along the way, Elena had become background noise in my own life, as familiar and unremarkable as the furniture she'd accused me of treating her like. And Sienna? What's her excuse for helping you destroy our marriage? Elena's expression hardened. Sienna watched you treat me like an employee for 5 years. She was the one who finally convinced me I deserved better. Better than what? A husband who works hard to support your lifestyle? A man who's never cheated, never lied, never made you question whether you could trust him? Better than a man who acts like I'm an inconvenience he has to tolerate instead of a woman he chose to marry. The words hung between us like an indictment. Elena was right about my neglect, but she was wrong about everything else. I had chosen her every day for 15 years. I just stopped making sure she knew it. So what now? I asked. Now you decide whether you want to fight for this marriage or let me go quietly. And if I choose to fight? Elena's smile was sad and tired. Then we both pretend tonight never happened, and you go back to ignoring me while I go back to pretending I don't exist anywhere but in Richard's bed. That's not fighting. That's just prolonging the inevitable. Then let me go, Caleb. Sign the papers when they come, keep the house, and find someone who can be happy with the life you're offering. She stood up and headed toward the stairs, but I wasn't done yet. Elena, I called after her. What if I told you Richard's married too? She paused without turning around. I know about Veronica. Do you know she's filing for divorce? Do you know Richard's business is leveraged to the breaking point? Do you know he's been having this exact same affair with at least 2 other women over the past year? Now she turned around, her face pale. That's not true. It's all true. Documented, verified, and sitting in an encrypted folder on my computer. Your Prince Charming is a serial cheater with a crumbling empire and a wife who's about to take half of what's left. Elena sank back down onto the stairs, the fight going out of her like air from a punctured tire. You're lying. I'm a cybersecurity consultant, Elena. Lying is what other people do. I deal in facts, and the facts say Richard Vale is using you the same way he's used every other woman who's fallen for his act. But he said what you wanted to hear. Just like he said it to Jennifer Morrison from the art gallery, and Lisa Chen from the marketing firm, and God knows how many others. Elena buried her face in her hands, and for a moment I felt sorry for her. She'd thrown away our marriage for a man who saw her as interchangeable with a dozen other lonely wives looking for excitement. What do you want from me? She asked through her fingers. I want you to understand that this isn't just about us anymore. You've involved our friends, your business, people who trusted you. Mike and Sarah are never going to look at you the same way. Your clients are going to wonder what other ethical lines you're willing to cross. This isn't just a marriage ending. It's your entire life imploding. Elena looked up at me with something that might have been hope. Unless we handle this like adults, instead of letting it turn into a public spectacle that destroys everyone involved. What did you have in mind? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Leave that to me. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes you believe in new beginnings. I woke up before Elena, made coffee, and sat in my home office planning the most important project of my career. Not the most lucrative or the most technically challenging, but definitely the most personal. Elena had crossed a line by involving our friends in her deception, but Sienna and Richard had made it worse by treating me like a fool who could be manipulated indefinitely. Now, they were all going to learn what happens when you underestimate a cybersecurity consultant with a grudge and nothing left to lose. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Dude, we need to talk. What the hell was that last night? Can't today, I replied. Working on something important. But thanks for being a real friend. It means more than you know. Caleb, seriously, if you need anything, I'm good. Better than good, actually. Talk soon. I spent the morning building what I called my revelation package, a comprehensive digital dossier that would expose the full scope of Elena, Sienna, and Richard's deception without crossing any legal lines. Everything was obtained through legitimate means, public records, social media analysis, and information they'd voluntarily shared through their own digital carelessness. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. I wasn't going to hack anyone or steal private information. I was just going to connect dots that were already visible to anyone who knew where to look, then present those connections in a way that told the complete story. Richard's business vulnerabilities were all public record, loan documents, partnership agreements, financial filings that painted a picture of a man living far beyond his means. His pattern of extramarital affairs was documented in social media photos, restaurant receipts, and hotel loyalty program data that he'd carelessly linked to his public profiles. Sienna's ethical compromises were hidden in plain sight within her company's client communications and billing records. Nothing illegal, but plenty that would raise questions about her professional judgment and business practices. Elena's involvement was the easiest to document because she'd been the least careful about covering her tracks. Hotel receipts charged to company accounts, personal expenses disguised as business meetings, and a digital trail of lies that stretched back years. By noon, I had everything I needed to destroy their reputations and relationships without breaking a single law. The question was how to deploy this information for maximum impact while maintaining plausible deniability. That's when inspiration struck. Elena emerged from the bedroom around 1 p.m., looking like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Her usual morning routine of yoga, skincare, and careful styling had been abandoned in favor of sweatpants and unwashed hair. "Coffee's in the kitchen," I said, without looking up from my computer. "Caleb, about last night, don't worry about it. I've been thinking, and you're right. We both deserve better than what we've become." Elena paused in the doorway, clearly not expecting this response. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not going to fight you on the divorce. Life's too short to stay in a marriage that makes both people miserable." "Really?" The hope in her voice was painful to hear. "Really, but I do have one request." "What?" "I want to host a dinner party next weekend. Nothing fancy, just a chance to say goodbye to our mutual friends before we make any announcements. Let people remember us as a couple who handled things with dignity." Elena's relief was visible. "That sounds nice, actually. Mature. I'll handle all the planning. You just show up and be your charming self. Who should we invite?" "The usual suspects. Mike and Sarah, obviously. Sienna and Richard, since they're such good friends. Maybe a few others from your work." "Richard might not be available," Elena said quickly. "He's very busy with his projects." "I'm sure he'll make time for such a special occasion. After all, he's been so invested in our relationship." Elena shot me a sharp look, but I kept my expression neutral. Let her wonder what I was planning. The uncertainty would make her more cooperative and less likely to interfere with my preparations. Over the next week, I threw myself into party planning with the enthusiasm of a man orchestrating his own funeral. The guest list was carefully curated to include everyone who needed to witness what was coming. The menu was designed to keep people at the table long enough for the full show. Even the seating arrangement was strategic, placing key players where they'd have the best view of each other's reactions. Meanwhile, I put the finishing touches on my revelation package. The information was organized into a multimedia presentation that would tell the story chronologically, building from suspicious patterns to undeniable proof of deception. Charts, graphs, timelines, and screenshots, everything presented with the kind of clinical precision that made denial impossible. Elena spent the week in a state of nervous energy, alternating between excitement about her impending freedom and anxiety about what I might be planning. She made several attempts to probe my intentions, but I deflected with discussions about wine selection and appetizer preferences. "You're being very calm about this," she said Thursday evening as I arranged flowers in our dining room. "What's the alternative? Screaming and throwing things? That's not who I am." "No, but neither is dinner party planning. You usually hate entertaining." "Maybe I'm discovering new sides of myself. Divorce can be very liberating." Elena didn't look convinced, but she also didn't push the issue. She was too focused on coordinating with Richard and Sienna to pay close attention to my activities. Friday night, I made my final preparations. The presentation was loaded onto my laptop, connected to the large monitor we used for movie nights. Backup copies were saved to multiple devices in case of technical difficulties. I even prepared printed handouts for anyone who wanted to study the evidence more closely. Saturday evening arrived with perfect October weather. Crisp air, clear skies, and the kind of golden light that makes everything look like a magazine photo. Our guests began arriving at 7, each bringing their own expectations and agendas to what they thought would be a normal dinner party. Mike and Sarah came first, both clearly uncomfortable but trying to be supportive friends. They brought wine and forced smiles, the kind of people who would show up to a funeral if you asked them to. Sienna arrived precisely on time, dressed in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. She surveyed the dining room like a general inspecting a battlefield, her sharp eyes cataloging every detail. Richard was fashionably late, making an entrance that suggested he thought this was his party rather than mine. He wore a navy suit that fit him perfectly, and carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. Elena played the perfect hostess, greeting everyone with air kisses and bright smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked beautiful in a way that seemed almost desperate, like she was trying to prove something to herself as much as to our guests. During cocktails, I made small talk about work, weather, and mutual acquaintances while mentally reviewing my presentation one final time. Everyone seemed relaxed, even Elena, who was probably counting down the minutes until she could announce our divorce and move on with her new life. Dinner proceeded smoothly through the appetizer and main course. The conversation flowed easily, lubricated by good wine and the comfortable familiarity of old friends. Richard regaled us with stories about his latest real estate conquests, while Sienna offered sharp commentary on local politics and business gossip. As I cleared the dinner plates, I caught Elena's eye and smiled. "Before we move on to dessert," I announced, "I have a little presentation I'd like to share with everyone." "A presentation?" Mike looked confused. "What kind of presentation?" "Just some thoughts I've been putting together about relationships, trust, and the importance of honesty in our personal and professional lives." I powered up the laptop and connected it to the monitor, which flickered to life with my title slide. "The Anatomy of Deception, a Case Study in Modern Betrayal." Elena's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against her plate with a sound like breaking bones. "Caleb," she whispered, "what are you doing?" "Sharing some insights I've gained over the past few weeks," I said, advancing to the next slide. "I think everyone will find it educational." The first section covered the basics of digital infidelity, how modern technology creates opportunities for deception while simultaneously generating evidence trails that can expose the truth. Screenshots of text messages, email headers, and location data painted a picture of systematic dishonesty. Sienna was the first to understand what was happening. Her face went white as she recognized her own words on the screen, messages she'd thought were private now displayed for everyone to see. "This is illegal," she said, her voice tight with controlled panic. "You can't just hack into people's private communications." "I didn't hack anything," I replied calmly. "Everything you see here was obtained through legitimate means. Public records, social media analysis, and information that was voluntarily shared with me." Richard was slower on the uptake, but his expression shifted from confusion to alarm as the presentation moved into his business dealings and personal relationships. The timeline of his affairs was laid out with clinical precision, showing a pattern of behavior that spanned years. "This is insane," he said, standing up from the table. "I don't have to listen to this." "Please sit down," I said. "We're just getting to the good part." The next section focused on Elena's role in the deception, documenting her affairs with multiple clients and the financial improprieties she'd used to fund her double life. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, and travel expenses, all charged to her company while she conducted personal relationships. Elena was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streams. "Please stop," she whispered. "Please." But I was just hitting my stride. The final section brought everything together, showing how Sienna had orchestrated the entire operation while Richard had provided the motivation and Elena had supplied the access. It was a conspiracy of selfishness and betrayal that had destroyed multiple relationships and violated numerous ethical boundaries. Mike and Sarah sat in stunned silence, their faces reflecting the horror of watching people they'd trusted reveal themselves as strangers. The couple they'd known for years had been a carefully constructed lie, and now they were seeing the ugly truth underneath. "The most interesting part," I said, advancing to my conclusion slides, "is how each of you thought you were using the others while being blind to how you were being used yourselves." I turned to Richard first. "You thought Elena was just another bored housewife looking for excitement, but she was actually documenting your relationship to use as leverage in her divorce proceedings." Richard's face went pale. "That's not true." "Check your phone," I suggested. I think you'll find Elena has been much more thorough in her record-keeping than you realized. Next, I addressed Sienna. You thought you were helping your friend escape an unhappy marriage, but Elena was actually planning to throw you under the bus if the affair became public. All those messages about it being your idea, your plan, your responsibility. She was building a paper trail to protect herself. Sienna's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Finally, I turned to Elena. And you thought you were trading up from a boring husband to an exciting lover, but Richard was already planning to dump you once his divorce was finalized. He never intended to leave his wife for you. He was just using you for sex, while he worked out a financial settlement with Veronica. Elena's sobs filled the silence that followed. The three conspirators sat around my dining room table like defendants awaiting sentencing, their web of lies finally exposed for everyone to see. Now, I said, closing the laptop with a decisive click, let's talk about how we're going to handle this situation like civilized adults. The negotiation that followed was swift and brutal. Faced with the prospect of having their deceptions made public, all three were suddenly very interested in finding an amicable solution. Richard agreed to end all contact with Elena and pay for the marriage counseling that might salvage his relationship with Veronica. Sienna agreed to dissolve her business partnership with Elena and provide references that would help her find new employment. Elena agreed to an uncontested divorce with a settlement that left me with the house and most of our assets. Most importantly, all three agreed to sign non-disclosure agreements that would prevent them from discussing the evening's revelations with anyone outside our immediate circle. As our guests prepared to leave, Mike pulled me aside. Jesus, Caleb, how long have you known? About a week, I said. Long enough to put together a complete picture. Are you okay? I considered the question seriously. Was I okay? My marriage was over, my trust had been shattered, and I'd just spent an evening systematically destroying three people's reputations. By any objective measure, I should have been devastated. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete clarity about who I was and what I wanted from life. Yeah, I said finally. I think I'm going to be just fine. After everyone left, Elena and I sat in our living room surrounded by the debris of our dinner party and our marriage. The silence stretched between us like a chasm that could never be bridged. I'm sorry, she said finally. For which part? All of it. The affair, the lies, the way I treated you. You didn't deserve any of this. No, I agreed. I didn't. What happens now? Now you pack your things and move out. The divorce papers will be filed Monday morning and we'll both move on with our lives. Will you ever forgive me? I looked at the woman I'd married 15 years ago, trying to find some trace of the person I'd fallen in love with. She was still there, buried under layers of selfishness and poor choices, but she was no longer someone I could trust or respect. Forgiveness isn't the right word, I said. I understand why you did what you did, and I accept my role in how our marriage fell apart. But forgive? No. Some things can't be forgiven, only survived. Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. I really did love you once. I know, I said. That's what makes this so tragic. She went upstairs to pack, and I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the remnants of our life together. Wedding photos, vacation souvenirs, shared memories that would now forever be tainted by the knowledge of how it all ended. But for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Not Elena's husband, or Sienna's victim, or Richard's obstacle, but Caleb Monroe, a man who'd been tested and emerged stronger, wiser, and completely free to write the next chapter of his story on his own terms. The evening had been a masterpiece of controlled destruction, a surgical strike that had eliminated my enemies while leaving me positioned to rebuild from a foundation of truth rather than lies. It wasn't the ending I'd planned for my marriage, but it was the ending I deserved. As Elena's footsteps echoed overhead, I poured myself a glass of the expensive whiskey we'd been saving for a special occasion, and raised it in a toast to the empty room. To new beginnings, I said aloud, and the courage to become the villain in someone else's story, if that's what it takes to be the hero in your own. I drained the glass and started planning my next move. The night was young, and for the first time in years, I had nowhere to be but exactly where I was.